what's up? Thanks for joining me. This is Robinson, and this is our first online lecture of Unit 5, 5.3, Managing the Economy. Let's get started. Okay, there are two types of economic policies. Hey, guess what? These are both on your vocab sheet for the unit. There's fiscal policy and there is monetary policy. I apologize in advance if my voice is not matched up with my lips. I tried to fix it, but I couldn't figure that out. Okay, fiscal policy is taxing and spending. Taxing and spending, as it has to do with the budget. So fiscal policy is conducted by Congress and the President. Alright, and then we have monetary policy. Monetary policy has to do with kind of the amount of money and regulating the amount of money. And this is done by the Federal Reserve Board. Remember them, they're also known as the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, or the Fed in quotation marks. And you may not realize it, but the banks in this country, they all get their money from the Federal Reserve Board, and the Federal Reserve Board adjusts interest rates. During good times, we maybe raise the interest rates, and during poor times, like right now, interest rates are very, very low. And this can affect, for you guys, this affects the price of your car loan, or for your parents, the interest rate that they get on their mortgage. And so of course you want to have the lowest interest rate possible. You need to know the difference between fiscal and monetary. Fiscal is taxing and spending. Monetary is actually controlling the supply of money. See my cat? See my cat? He's sleeping. His name is Proper. I'm serious. Okay. Next slide. Let's look at the federal government's involvement in the economy. Alright, the Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate interstate and foreign commerce. I think that we know that. That is done through the Commerce Clause. It specifically states in the Constitution that Congress does have the power to regulate interstate commerce. For many, many years, the government was laissez-faire. They were hands-off. They were not involved in policies that had to do with economics. They said, you know, mostly that the banks could take care of their own problems, and that the stock market could take care of its own problems, and factory owners could take care of their own problems, and they mostly ignored business for the most part, and money. But during the Industrial Revolution, if you remember from your U.S. history class, a lot of bad stuff was going on. I mean, people were falling into meat grinding machines and being cut apart and actually served in cans of meat, you know, without being cleaned out of the machines. Monopolies were forming. You had guys like Standard Oil, Rockefeller, that owned 90% of the oil, or Carnegie that owned 90% of the steel, and it was raising prices, and it was bad for business. And so during the Industrial Revolution, the government got more involved in the economy by breaking up some monopolies, also known as trusts, regulating meat and drugs, regulating railroads. Okay, so they began to regulate the economy more. Alright, and they started to regulate the economy even more during the Great Depression. Alright, so still the government was very much hands-off, but during the Great Depression, many, many banks went out of business, and people lost their life savings in their bank accounts. Many farms went out of business. You know, deflation occurred, which is the opposite of inflation. Essentially, things were bad, and the government had to get more and more involved. And kind of since the Great Depression, we have seen the government take a much more active role in the economy. Alright, and there are a couple different theories on just how involved the government should be in the economy. And one very controversial theory is Keynesian economics. Keynesian economics, and this is come up with by John Maynard Keynes. I think I'm saying that right. His theories were quite controversial, and they shape a lot of how America behaves today. Alright, I have some Republican friends of mine who are very much mad at this guy that he ever existed in some of his theories. So let's look at some of the ideas that he had. He says that the government should try to manipulate the economic health of the economy through its level of spending. And what that means is that you know, it's natural in economics and in the United States history for the economy to go up and down, up and down. You have, like, oh my gosh, the great times of the 90s followed by the great crash of 2008, 2009. Okay, that's natural. Keynes argued that the government should get involved and try to limit the impact of these ups and downs, and almost create more of a steady rising line that doesn't go up and down. And the key here that you need to know is that in hard times, like right now with Obama, that the government should increase spending, even if it means running a large deficit, even if it means basically borrowing money from other countries to increase your spending, in order to stimulate the economy. So maybe in 1990, when the government spent $2 trillion, during the Great Recession of Obama and President Bush, maybe the government should spend $3 trillion. And some of that should be like tax breaks for businesses who hire employees, trying to get people back to work. The government will lose money trying to get the economy back on track, but eventually they will fix the economy, and then they can reduce spending after that. So the opposite of this is still part of the same theory, is that during boom times, like during the 1990s, during the 1950s, that the government should decrease spending and cool down the economy. That maybe you don't want an economy that's booming too much, because what usually follows a boom is a burst, okay, like a crash. Alright, so we want to, I'm not saying we want to have a steady line, but rather a line that is, going up and up and up, but not like these wild, crazy movements. That's what Keynes believed. I'm going to skip that. The problem with his theory, though, is that what we find is that government spending does rise during a crisis like the Great Depression, or right now during the Great Recession. But the problem is when things get better, it becomes very, very difficult to get rid of some of these government spending programs that you've been doing. So, a lot of those programs created by Roosevelt during the Great Depression, they're still around. Perhaps some of the behavior that we're doing right now during the Great Recession will keep lasting, even if the economy gets good again. And that kind of goes against his theory. He said you're supposed to cut it whenever things get better. Just look at 2008, 2009. Congress passed a stimulus package. So, I don't know if you remember, it was like, what was it, $700 or $800 billion. I think they called it a trillion, but it was $700 or $800 billion that Obama passed as a stimulus package during his first year in office. Very controversial, upset a lot of people. Obama will claim this kept us from going into a Great Depression. Republicans will say it was a big waste of money and that it didn't really do anything. But it did stuff like money for freeways. I know when I'm driving on the freeway, sometimes I see a sign that says paid for by the American Recovery Act of 2008. And that's just basically the stimulus package that was passed. And then we also did a bailout package of the government got involved in both the auto industry and the banks in 2008, 2009. We saved a lot of them from going under. Very unpopular with the American people. The auto industry has rebounded quite nicely and paid back a lot of the loans that we gave them, but the banks, we lost a lot of money on that one, I think. So his theories are still alive and well. Kind of the opposite end of the spectrum is more the Republican version of the theory, and this is called supply-side economics. And what supply-side economics says is that you should cut taxes. Like let's ignore that boom and bust thing that we were talking about. That you should cut taxes for everybody, especially businesses. All right, cut taxes for businesses. So let's say right now America taxes businesses 20%. They don't, but let's say they do. Let's say if I believe in supply-side economics, also called Reaganomics, also called voodoo economics, that if I cut taxes, then businesses will have more money to spend. They'll hire more workers. Those workers will pay their taxes, and as a result, the government will make up just as much money as it had. Like, they'll get the money back. Business will boom. Unemployment will go down. Everybody's incomes will go up, and more tax money will go into the treasury because more people are working. The most famous advocate of this was Ronald Reagan, as you can probably guess, as it's often called Reaganomics. The validity of this, and really the validity of Keynesian economics too, no one knows for sure the impact. I mean, it's very political whether or not these things work or not. If you're a Republican, you would say this works right here. If you're a Democrat, you would say this works. And there's a lot of questions about whether or not that's true. Hold on, my wife is calling me. Okay, sorry, back to business here. So there's a lot of argument about which one of these theories really works. And honestly, it's hard to say. But I will say that supply-side economics, because we've cut these taxes, they have not been accompanied by cuts in spending. So although Reagan cut taxes and Bush cut taxes, we haven't really not spent the money that's supposed to be accompanied by this. So we're still doing Medicare, Social Security, food stamps, welfare, and as a result, the government's just not taking in enough cash. And so we have seen our deficits go way up since Reagan. And George W. Bush believed in this idea too. You mostly will hear any Republican running for office say they believe they need to cut taxes in order to stimulate business, and you'll mostly hear any Democrat running for office say that the government needs to spend more money and stimulate the economy. Alright, and lastly, just this little slide on monetarism. Monetarism is basically saying that the government needs to regulate the money supply, and they can tighten up the money supply by increasing interest rates to reduce inflation, or they can loosen up the money supply, make interest rates lower to stimulate the economy. I'm not going to get into this too much, except to say that the government and the Fed, which is the back to the beginning here, that's the Federal Reserve Board, they have control over the money supply, and they can change interest rates, and that can have a huge impact on the economy. And they're trying basically to stabilize the economy and keep it from getting too boomy and too busty. Alright, modern developments. Congress, there has been a push for a balanced budget amendment. I talked about this in class. That deficits have kind of grown out of control, and that we feel like Congress is in charge of controlling their own spending, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense. That's like telling a kid they're going to be their own parent, and of course they're going to misbehave. Some people say we need to pass a constitutional amendment to make it so that they have to have $1 in order to spend $1, or have $1 trillion in order to spend $1 trillion, and maybe it's not a bad idea. So supporters of this said it would help balance the budget, but opponents say that it's a little trouble to tinker with the Constitution like this, and that if there was, say, World War III, that it would be difficult to pay for that war quickly without trying to go around this amendment. And then I had students today say, well, we could just build in a provision that said during war times the government could spend the money to regulate, or spend the money for war, and that would be allowed. And I think there's some concern that, well, Congress would just try to go around that, and they figure out a way, we'll get into this little military conflict, we'll call it a war, and then we can spend as much money as we want to. So it would be tough, maybe, to enforce it properly. The amendment was proposed in Congress, but voted down by the House in 1992. Another possibility to fix the budget would be possibly giving the president a line-item veto power, so that if he got a budget bill with 1,000 things in it, and let's say he just wanted to cross off the guy who wants to build a baseball bat museum in Baltimore, Maryland, or maybe he wants to cross off food stamps and just eliminate it from the budget. Maybe we want to give the president that power. There's some question about whether or not that should be done, but it would certainly help control the budget. Remember, I talked about this in class. In the 90s, we had a pay-as-you-go system, but that pay-as-you-go system expired. Okay, let's talk about trade policy. America today has a bit of a trade deficit. Okay, what that means is that we are buying more things from other countries than they are buying from us. Now, that being said, I would say it might not be as bad as you think it is. You probably think everything's made in China and that America makes nothing, and that's not really true. We do have a lot of stuff that we make and trade, but we are still buying more from other countries, especially China, because they make things nice and cheap, and especially oil, because we just don't have enough. readily flowing in this country. We have enough under the ground, but we don't have enough that we're pulling out in this country, so that we are often buying oil from other countries. And when you have a trade deficit, that's not great for the American economy. As a result, if I'm a business owner and I can make a T-shirt in China for 17 cents, or I can make it in America for $8, it's a kind of a no-brainer as to where am I going to move my factory. Am I going to move it to Austin, Texas, or am I going to move it to Shanghai, China? I'm going to move it to China, and as a result, a lot of Americans have lost their job because of outsourcing or offshoring. Some Americans say maybe we need to practice protectionism. Protectionism is maybe we would raise the tariffs and make everything from China cost way more money than it actually does, and then people would have to buy American, and more Americans would go back to work. But today, that's not really the practice anymore. The practice today with the world is actually to reduce tariffs and have free trade. And so we create all these organizations to try to actually encourage trade among different countries, and so that there's no tariffs on stuff, actually. So which ones do you think you should know? You should know about NAFTA. Write down what NAFTA is. It's a North American Free Trade Agreement. I can almost guarantee I'm going to have a test question on it. And what it is an agreement between America, Mexico, and Canada that we could trade freely between each other and not have tariffs on our goods. Alright, then there's WTO, World Trade Organization, GATT. I'm not going to get into them all, but basically today the idea is we call up other countries. I think most recently Obama got an agreement with South Korea that anything we trade with each other will have no tariffs on it. Alright, because we try to work with our allies. And it's supposed to be that, if all these countries are working together and intertwined, there's more likely to be peace, and there's way less likely to be military conflicts because people want to sell stuff to each other. A lot of kids say, are we going to go to war with China, Mr. Robinson? And my answer to that is, I don't see how we would go to war with China whenever we're their number one customer. They love the fact that we're buying all their stuff. We are almost single-handedly keeping their economy afloat, so why in the world would you want to stop that money from flowing in? So at least in the immediate future, I don't see any military conflict happening with China. Alright, that concludes our notes. Remember, if you printed them out, I want you to write a summary and answer all the study guide questions on your paper. And I will probably put this on Schoology with a couple questions just to make sure that you watched it before class. So make sure that you answer the questions on Schoology. Okay, peace.